So, how does a scattered, basically illiterate group of people from the edge of the world go on to conquer almost all of Asia and create the largest land empire in history? It's a story of, well, unimaginable brutality for sure, but it's also a story that, believe it or not, laid the groundwork for our modern interconnected world. Okay, let's dive into the incredible, terrifying, and transformative story of the Mongol Empire. Picture this. It's the 1330s, and this legendary traveler, Ibn Battuta, is making his way across Central Asia. He's heard all the stories about the amazing cities of the Silk Road, places like Bukhara and Samarkand, these global hubs of learning and commerce. But what he finds is a trail of ghosts. City after massive city, once home to hundreds of thousands of people, are now just silent, empty ruins. He writes about mosques and markets just crumbled into rubble, with weeds growing inside what used to be palaces. You can just imagine him standing there in those empty streets, thinking, what kind of force could do this? What kind of power could cause destruction on this planetary scale? And how did they become so powerful that nobody could stop them? This, right here, is the central mystery we're going to unravel today. To really understand the conquerors, you first have to understand the world that made them. We have to go to the Eurasian steppe. It's the largest grassland on Earth, a huge, unforgiving landscape that was basically the perfect training ground for warriors. Life out there was a life in constant motion. You followed your herds, and your herds followed the grass. A bad winter could just wipe you out completely. A raid from a rival clan could happen at literally any moment. So, from the time they were 3 years old, every single boy learned to ride a horse like it was part of their own body, and shoot a bow. Hunting wasn't a hobby, it was military practice. Every man was a natural-born cavalryman. The steppe didn't just house these people, it forged them. It created this huge, latent army, just waiting for one person to come along and unite it. And that leader, well, he starts out as just a boy named Temujin. He wasn't some prince destined for greatness. No, he was born into the absolute harshest circumstances you can imagine, an outcast who had to claw and fight for every single scrap of survival. I mean, look at this. His early life story is just one tragedy after another. When he's 9, his dad, a minor chief, gets poisoned. His own clan decides a widow and her kids are worthless, so they abandon them to starve on the open steppe. He gets hunted down, enslaved, forced to wear this heavy wooden collar before he makes this crazy, daring escape. And just when things seem to be looking up, he gets married, and his new wife, Borte, is kidnapped in a raid. It's like the world was actively trying to break this kid. And through all this, during those years they were literally starving, his mother, Ho Yulen, held the family together. To teach her sons a critical lesson, she told them this old story. She gave each of her sons one arrow and told them to break it. Easy, right? They all snapped them. But then she took 5 arrows and bundled them together and challenged them to break the bundle. None of them could. The message was crystal clear. Alone, you're weak. Together, you are absolutely unbreakable. And that lesson, that would become the core of Temujin's entire philosophy. So Temujin starts to build a following, right? But as he gets more powerful, it puts him on a direct collision course with the biggest warrior on the steppe, a guy who also happened to be his childhood best friend and sworn blood brother, Jamuka. The entire future of the Mongol people was going to be decided in this brutal civil war between 2 brothers. Now, what's fascinating here is that this wasn't just a simple power struggle. This was a battle of ideas, of 2 totally different ways of seeing the world. Jamuka represented the old way, a rigid system where noble bloodlines got all the power and all the best loot. But Temujin, he was offering something totally revolutionary. He didn't give a damn about your family name. He cared about what you could do and how loyal you were. He welcomed anybody, commoners, outcasts, even guys from enemy tribes, and promised them a future based on merit. And this, right here, this was an absolute game changer. Think about it. In the old system, if you died fighting, your family was left with nothing. But under Temujin, a cut of all the loot was set aside specifically for the widows and orphans of every single soldier who died. It was basically an insurance policy, and it bought him something more valuable than anything: fierce, unbreakable loyalty. Men would literally fight to the death for a leader who guaranteed their family would be taken care of. After years of just brutal warfare, Temujin finally defeats Jamuka and all the other rivals. So in 1206, a huge meeting of all the tribes, called a Kurultai, is held. They all showed up as dozens of warring clans, but they would leave as a single unified nation. And they gave their new ruler a new title. He wasn't just Temujin anymore. They gave him the title you see here, Genghis Khan, which we know as Genghis Khan. And get this, it wasn't a name, it was a title, one that matched his ambition. It meant something like universal ruler, and it was a clear signal that uniting the steppe wasn't the end of his plan. Oh no, this was just the beginning. Okay, so he's united the nomads. Awesome. But how in the world did this new nation go on to conquer massive, fortified empires in China, in Persia, and beyond? Well, the answer is in the revolutionary design of the Mongol war machine. Genghis Khan's first move was pure genius in its simplicity. He completely shattered all the old, problematic clan loyalties. Instead, he reorganized every man into military units, all based on the number 10. Squads of 10, companies of 100, battalions of 1,000, and so on. Your new loyalty wasn't to your clan chief anymore. It was to the 9 other guys in your squad. It was brutally efficient, and it turned the entire Mongol nation into one giant, disciplined army. And at the heart of this army, you have what was probably the most effective soldier on the planet at the time, the Mongol horse archer. These guys were the product of a lifetime on the steppe. They could fire this incredibly powerful composite bow with lethal accuracy while at a full gallop. And each warrior had a whole string of horses, like 3 or 4, so they could swap them out and cover insane distances at incredible speeds. They were masters of tactics too, like the famous feigned retreat, where they'd pretend to run away, tricking armies into chasing them right into a deadly trap. But you know, their greatest weapon might not have been the bow or the horse. It might have been fear. The message they sent to every single city in their path was brutally, chillingly simple. You can surrender and join our empire, or you can resist. And if you resist, every single man, woman, and child in your city will be killed. This terror wasn't random. It was a deliberate strategy. Entire cities would just surrender without a fight because they'd heard the horror stories of what happened to the ones who didn't. The conquests that followed were, well, they were swift and savage, and they fundamentally changed the world. But the legacy of the Mongols is this profound paradox, a story of both unparalleled destruction and, weirdly, unprecedented connection. Let's start with the terror. Let this number sink in for a second. It's estimated that the Mongol conquests killed as many as 40 million people. To put that into perspective, that was around 11% of the entire population of the world at the time. It was a demographic catastrophe on a scale that's almost impossible to wrap your head around. And remember those cities we talked about at the beginning? The ones Ibn Battuta saw? This is what he was talking about. Merv, which was once one of the biggest cities in the world, was so completely leveled that it was just abandoned to the desert, left for owls and wild dogs. This was the price of resistance. The greatest centers of science and culture on the planet were literally wiped off the map. But, and this is the great paradox of the whole story, by conquering all of these different kingdoms and empires, the Mongols accidentally created something the world had never ever seen before. One single, secure empire stretching all the way from the Pacific coast of China to the edge of Europe. Historians have a name for this period, the Pax Mongolica, the Mongol Peace. And for the first time in centuries, the Silk Road was totally safe to travel. The Mongols policed it with ruthless efficiency. They set up something called the Yam, which was like a continental pony express, carrying messages and goods across Asia in weeks instead of months. It was famously said that a young woman carrying a sack of gold could walk from one end of the empire to the other without being harmed. And look at what happened because of it. This new security just unleashed this flood of exchange. Chinese inventions like gunpowder, the printing press, and the magnetic compass, they all traveled west to Europe, where they would completely change the course of history. And in the other direction, you had Persian art, medicine, and even food moving east. The world was shrinking. It was becoming interconnected in a way that was just impossible before. And what about the personal legacy of Genghis Khan himself? Well, this is just mind-blowing. A major genetic study in 2003 found that a huge number of men across Asia carry a Y chromosome marker that can be traced back to him and his male relatives. The estimated number of his direct descendants alive today, 16 million. His legacy isn't just written in history books, it's written in our DNA. So where does that leave us? What do we make of all this? Were the Mongols just the most savage conquerors in history? Or were they the unintentional founders of our modern world, who created a global network through violence? The truth is, they were both. There's a legacy of terror and transformation, a complex, challenging story that is written in both blood and silk.